Bear taps on window for 8 hours. His heartbreaking reason will move you to tears. It was a peaceful morning at Emily's remote cabin, nestled deep in the woods, far from the noise of the outside world. The sun had barely risen, casting soft golden rays across the quiet landscape. Inside, Emily sat by her window, sipping a cup of hot coffee, her mind still waking up to the beauty of the day. The calm of nature surrounded her, the gentle chirping of birds, the rustling of leaves in the breeze, and the occasional rustle of animals in the distance. For a moment, everything felt perfect. The world outside seemed still, untouched, and tranquil. She could hear the whisper of the wind brushing against the trees, the kind of silence that makes you feel safe and content, disconnected from everything except the present moment. But then, without warning, the peace was shattered. A loud, sharp knock echoed through the cabin, startling Emily. It wasn't the sound of wind or branches tapping against the window, but something more deliberate, something insistent, a strange, heavy knock that sent a jolt of confusion through her. She froze for a moment, unsure of what to make of it. Was it just an animal, maybe a bird or a squirrel, tapping against the glass? Or was there something or someone out there? She set her coffee down and slowly stood up, walking toward the window with caution. Her heart started to beat a little faster as she reached the curtain, pulling it back just enough to get a glimpse outside. But there was nothing, no sign of the culprit. She let out a soft breath of relief, thinking it was nothing more than a trick of the wind. Then the knock came again, this time louder. The sound was unmistakable. Someone, or something, was knocking on her window. Emily's heart raced, her mind swirling with confusion. She couldn't ignore the unsettling knock that had echoed through the cabin. She took a deep breath, trying to calm the growing unease in her chest. The knock was persistent, each one more forceful than the last. She stepped back from the window, wondering if it was some kind of strange animal. Perhaps a large bird or a deer, but nothing made sense. There was a certain rhythm to the knock, almost as if it was intentional. Something told her it wasn't just a simple animal. She could feel a strange tension building, an unfamiliar sense of urgency in the air. The knocks kept coming, relentless, as though they were calling out to her. Her curiosity got the better of her. She had to know what or who was out there. Taking slow, cautious steps, Emily approached the window again. She moved the curtain just a little, her breath catching in her throat as her eyes scanned the yard outside. For a moment, she saw nothing. The woods were quiet again, but the knock had stopped. Emily's mind told her to go back to her seat, to pretend like she hadn't heard anything. But then, just as she was about to turn away, it came again. The knock, louder and closer. Her pulse quickened as she drew the curtain fully open. And there, standing just outside the window, was something that made her blood run cold. A large, brown bear. Its massive body was hunched slightly, its eyes filled with a mix of weariness and something else. Something that didn't seem right. The bear was staring directly at her, its large paw raised, gently tapping the window. Its movements were calm, almost pleading. The knocking had stopped, but the bear's intense gaze never left Emily. Her mind raced. What was it doing here? How had it gotten so close to the cabin without her hearing it? Emily's instinct was to step back, to shut the curtains and lock the doors. But something in the bear's eyes held her in place. This wasn't an ordinary encounter, it felt different. The bear wasn't acting aggressively, and its steady, rhythmic knocking seemed like a call for help, not a threat. As the minutes ticked by, Emily's fear slowly morphed into something else. She watched as the bear continued to tap at the window, never making a move to leave. It was almost as if it was waiting for something, waiting for her to do something. Emily tried to convince herself that it was just a hungry animal, looking for food or attention. But there was something more. Something in the way it stood there, motionless, just beyond her reach. Time passed, and the bear didn't budge. It knocked, then paused, then knocked again. Its paw gently tapped against the glass with a rhythm that suggested patience. It wasn't trying to break in, it wasn't causing damage. It was just knocking. Emily stood frozen, torn between staying inside where it was safe and stepping out to see if the bear needed help. The idea of approaching such a powerful creature made her hesitate. But the longer she stared at the bear's sad eyes, the more she felt an undeniable pull to act. An hour passed. Then two. The bear was still there, waiting. Emily stood there, her eyes locked on the bear, her heart pounding in her chest. The knock had stopped, but the bear hadn't moved. It stood there, still and watchful, its large body slightly hunched, eyes fixed on her window. Emily's fear remained, but now something else started to take root. Curiosity. Why wasn't the bear attacking? Why wasn't it trying to tear at the window or find a way inside? Instead, it was gently tapping with its paw, as though trying to communicate. There was a softness to its movements, a lack of aggression that confused Emily even more. This was no ordinary bear. She had seen plenty of wildlife in her time out here, but nothing like this. The bear's eyes held a strange intensity. There was a desperation in them, but not the kind of wild hunger she might expect from a creature this large. It wasn't angry or frantic, as if it were simply caught in some quiet, unseen struggle. For a moment, Emily even thought she saw the faintest trace of pain in those dark eyes. Was it hurt? Hungry? Lost? As the minutes stretched on, Emily couldn't help but feel the weight of its gaze. It wasn't just a wild animal outside her window. It felt like something more. She had heard stories before, legends of animals seeking help from humans, but she had never believed them. Now, as she stood frozen, watching the bear's unwavering attention, she found herself questioning everything she thought she knew. The bear gently lowered its paw from the window and took a few slow steps backward, never breaking eye contact with Emily. It stood there for a few moments before stepping forward again, pressing its paw to the window once more, this time with more force. The soft tap had turned into a more deliberate knock, the bear's claws lightly scraping the glass as it reached higher. The tapping wasn't frantic. It was measured, purposeful, like a plea. The knocking continued, each tap adding to the mounting tension inside Emily. She could feel the weight of the bear's presence, the sense that it was trying to communicate something important. Was it injured? Was it asking for help? The longer she stared, the more it seemed like the bear's knocking wasn't a random act. There was a reason. Emily's thoughts raced as she stood there, staring at the bear. The fear was still there, lurking in the back of her mind, but now it was mixed with something stronger, a growing sense of concern. The bear hadn't shown aggression, but its persistence and its behavior were impossible to ignore. It was asking for help, but was she capable of offering it? What could she possibly do for a bear that size, so far away from any real help? Her instincts told her to lock the doors, call animal control, and let professionals handle it. It would be the safe thing to do. It would be the logical thing to do. But as she stood there, watching the bear's slow, deliberate movements, her curiosity deepened. She couldn't shake the feeling that something more was at play. She thought of the stories she had heard about animals showing intelligence, even the ability to seek out humans when they were in distress. Was this one of those rare moments? Could this bear really be asking for help? Or was it just a strange coincidence? Emily took a step back, pacing now as she weighed her options. Should she call someone? Was it worth the risk to approach the bear? There was a dangerous uncertainty about the situation. Wild animals could be unpredictable, and a bear, especially this close, was a serious threat. Yet, everything inside her told her the bear wasn't here to hurt her. It wasn't threatening. It wasn't charging at the window. Instead, it had been knocking, asking. It wasn't a normal situation, but then again, life in the woods never was. As the bear continued to knock, its patience never faltering, Emily felt an overwhelming sense of empathy. It wasn't just about fear anymore. It was about understanding that this creature, majestic and powerful, was standing there in need. If she didn't do something, what would happen? The thought of letting it go on without helping seemed unbearable. But what could she do? Was it too dangerous to go outside? Could she help the bear without putting herself in harm's way? She ran through all the possibilities in her mind, her thoughts a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Part of her wanted to run the other way, to hide, to be safe. But another part, The part that couldn't ignore the animal's silent plea was urging her to act. Should she open the door and step into the unknown? Or should she remain behind the safety of her glass window, pretending it wasn't her problem? The longer the bear stood there, patiently knocking, the harder it became to ignore. The knocking continued. Tap, tap, tap. With each knock, Emily felt a pull she couldn't resist. The bear's persistence was both heart-wrenching and bewildering, and she could no longer stand there frozen with uncertainty. Her fear, while still present, was now being overtaken by a growing sense of compassion. Her mind raced. What if this wasn't just an ordinary bear in search of food or territory? What if it was truly in pain, and the knocking was its last attempt to find help? The cabin felt incredibly silent now, the only sound being the occasional scrape of the bear's paw against the glass. It felt like the world had stopped for a moment, with Emily and the bear locked in this strange, unspoken communication. Emily took a deep breath, steadying herself. Her heart told her that if there was even the smallest chance this bear was in distress, she couldn't just turn away. She had spent enough time in these woods to know that animals sometimes seek out help when they're unable to care for themselves. She had seen it before with other creatures. Foxes, birds, even deer, all with injuries or troubles, doing whatever they could to survive. But this was different. A bear was strong, capable, and usually far more independent. The knocking wasn't a random act of curiosity or a warning. It was a cry for help. Taking a step toward the door, Emily's hands trembled. She didn't know what to expect, but in that moment, something inside her solidified. There was no turning back. She had to go outside. She had to at least try to help. The moment Emily opened the door, the cold air rushed in, a stark contrast to the warmth of the cabin. Her breath hitched, but she steeled herself as she stepped outside, her eyes immediately locking onto the bear. The creature stood there, unmoving, its gaze still fixated on her with that same intensity. She approached cautiously, her footsteps careful on the frost-covered ground. Every instinct told her to be wary, to keep her distance, but the bear's patience and the vulnerability she saw in its eyes kept her grounded. She moved slowly, speaking in soft, gentle tones, trying to calm herself and the bear. "Hey there." "It's okay," Emily murmured, her voice shaky but reassuring. As she drew closer, she finally saw what had been hidden beneath the bear's thick fur. The injury. The bear's right hind leg was badly wounded. There was a deep gash, clearly from some sort of sharp object or a trap. The wound was raw and angry, still bleeding in patches, and Emily could see the strain in the bear's posture as it favored the leg. The injury was severe, but more than that, it was clear the bear had been suffering for a while. It had been dragging itself around, trying to survive despite the pain, and now it was reaching out, knocking on her window, seeking help. Emily's breath caught in her throat as she crouched down, carefully examining the wound from a safe distance. The sight was heartbreaking. The bear's eyes, once fierce and powerful, now looked weary and defeated. It had been through so much already, and yet here it was trying to communicate, still desperate for help. In that moment, Emily felt her fear dissolve completely, replaced by an overwhelming need to act. She had to help this creature, no matter how difficult, no matter how dangerous. As Emily stood there, taking in the sight of the injured bear, a strange quietness fell between them. There was no growling or show of aggression. The bear simply watched her, its deep brown eyes filled with a quiet desperation that spoke volumes. It was as though, in this moment, the two were connected by something unspoken. The bear wasn't just an animal in distress. It was a living being, reaching out for help, relying on Emily's humanity to show kindness and compassion. The bond between them was tangible now, more than just a human and an animal. Emily had no words for it, no explanation for the overwhelming sense that the bear trusted her. The knock had been a plea, but now, standing before the bear, Emily realized that this was more than just a call for help. It was an act of raw vulnerability, a silent admission of pain and need. Her hand shook as she reached out, instinctively brushing the air between her and the bear as though to reassure it that she was there. The bear didn't pull away. Instead, it stood still, its breathing slow, almost as though it understood she wasn't a threat. They both shared a moment of silence, two beings from different worlds finding a connection in the most unexpected of ways. Emily's resolve hardened. This wasn't just an injured animal. It was a creature in need of healing, and she was the only one who could help it. The weight of the moment pressed on her shoulders, but she stood tall, her mind already working through the next steps. She needed to act fast before the bear's injury worsened, and she knew that the first thing she had to do was get the bear somewhere safe, away from the risk of further harm. Without hesitating, Emily made up her mind. This bear wouldn't be left to suffer. She would find a way to help it, no matter what. The world around them seemed to pause. As Emily stood face to face with the injured bear, the weight of the situation sank in deeper. The bear's suffering was evident, and yet, despite the pain, it had not acted out of aggression. Instead, it had knocked, repeatedly, patiently, desperately, for help. Emily's heart raced, but now there was no fear, just compassion. She could feel the connection growing stronger with each passing second, an unspoken understanding between them. The bear wasn't just a wild animal seeking help. It was an individual, an intelligent, sentient being who had somehow found the courage to approach a human. And now it was entrusting Emily with its care. The bear let out a soft grunt, almost as if acknowledging her presence. It didn't flinch when she stepped closer, and for the first time, she could see it relaxing slightly, its muscles unwinding in the quiet of the moment. This was a creature that had been in pain for so long, fighting against an injury, struggling to survive. But now it wasn't fighting anymore. It had surrendered, and Emily realized with a rush of emotion that this was a moment of trust, one that was rarely shared between humans and wild animals. It was then that Emily noticed something truly remarkable. The bear's expression had softened. The sharpness of fear or distrust in its eyes had melted away. There was a faint expression of gratitude in those deep brown eyes, a look that no words could convey, but that was unmistakably there. The bear didn't need to say thank you. It was showing her its gratitude simply by standing there, letting her approach, letting her help. In that moment, Emily understood. She was not just providing care for an injured animal. She was offering the gift of compassion, of empathy, something beyond the realm of survival. She had become the bear's lifeline, and the weight of that responsibility settled on her shoulders. But she no longer felt the burden. Instead, she felt honored. In the stillness of the woods, with only the sound of the wind and the quiet rustle of the leaves around them, Emily felt a deep sense of peace. She gently knelt down beside the bear, her heart swelling with empathy. She had always known that animals were capable of emotions, fear, joy, trust, but never had she felt it so strongly, so clearly, as she did now. The bear, though massive and strong, was no longer an intimidating force of nature. It was a wounded soul reaching out for comfort. Emily's eyes filled with tears as she slowly placed her hand on its fur, her fingers brushing against the coarse hair, the warmth of its body offering a strange comfort. There was no wildness left in the bear, no fear of being preyed upon. It simply rested there, allowing her to touch it, to offer it care in the most human of ways, with tenderness, with empathy, and with love. Emily realized in that moment that empathy had power. It was the power to break down barriers between species, the power to heal wounds that went beyond physical injury. The bear, despite its size, despite its strength, had sought something far greater than food or shelter. It had sought human connection. And in that instant, Emily understood that the simplest, most profound thing she could offer was the same thing the bear had offered her: the courage to trust, the willingness to care, and the power to simply be there. The bond that formed between them was not just about the physical act of helping. It was the bond of two creatures sharing a moment of vulnerability. It was the power of empathy, the understanding that, in times of pain and fear, we all need someone to reach out to, someone to care. And sometimes, in the most unlikely of circumstances, that someone is not just another human being but an animal, a bear that had come to her window for help. The morning light filtered through the trees, casting long shadows on the forest floor. Emily sat on the porch, her eyes still fixed on the place where the bear had stood the night before. The bear had been gone for several hours now, but the weight of their shared experience lingered in the air. Emily's hands shook slightly as she cleaned the supplies she had used to treat the bear's injury. The gash on the bear's leg was still painful, but she had done her best to tend to it. The bear had seemed to appreciate her efforts, but now, as the sun rose higher, it was clear the bear needed to return to the wilderness. It had taken what it needed from her: care, empathy, and a chance to heal, and now it was time to go. Emily had known this moment would come, but it didn't make it any easier. The bear's departure wasn't sudden. It was slow, deliberate, almost as if it knew Emily was watching. It took several steps back from the porch, its limp slightly less noticeable than before. Emily stood up, wiping away a tear that had slipped down her cheek. She wasn't sad because the bear was leaving. She was sad because she knew that the moment they shared, the connection they had formed, would likely never happen again. The bear paused at the edge of the woods, looking back one last time. For a moment, Emily thought she saw a flicker of recognition in the bear's eyes, as though it understood the bond they had shared and was silently thanking her for her help. Then, with one final glance, it turned and disappeared into the trees, its large form blending with the shadows of the forest. As the bear melted into the woods, Emily stood motionless, her heart heavy but full. There were no words left to say, no final act of kindness to give. The bear had gone and she had done what she could. Yet the image of its departure stayed with her. The bear hadn't left in fear, nor had it run from her care. Instead, it had walked away with quiet dignity, its limp still there, but its spirit stronger for having been helped. The final glance between Emily and the bear was something she would carry with her for the rest of her life. It was more than just a look. It was a symbol of everything that had transpired: the trust, the bond, the empathy, and the healing. As Emily stood there, watching the spot where the bear had disappeared, she felt a deep sense of gratitude wash over her. It wasn't just the bear that had been healed. She, too, had been changed by the experience. The bear had given her something invaluable: an understanding of the profound connection that can exist between humans and animals, something that transcends words and actions. As the day went on and the sounds of the forest began to fill the air again, Emily sat back down on the porch, her mind replaying everything that had happened: the bear's desperate knocks, the fear that had turned to curiosity, and the quiet bond they had shared. All of it had left an indelible mark on her soul. She thought about how easy it is to turn away when things are difficult, when there's danger, when there's fear. The world can seem overwhelming, and sometimes it feels safer to ignore the struggles of others, to pretend they don't exist. But the bear had shown her something else: the power of listening, the strength that can come from reaching out to someone or something that needs help. Emily had given the bear what it had been searching for: compassion. And in return, the bear had given her something she hadn't expected: a deeper understanding of empathy, of how it can bridge the gap between species, between fear and trust, between loneliness and connection. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Emily closed her eyes for a moment, letting the cool breeze wash over her. The forest felt different now, as though it held a secret that only she knew. It was a secret of quiet acts of kindness, of unexpected bonds, and of how one simple moment could change everything. She smiled softly to herself. The bear was gone, but their bond would live on in her heart. And in the end, Emily realized that was all that really mattered. As the day faded into evening, Emily's heart still carried the weight of the encounter. The events of the past 24 hours had shifted something within her, something she hadn't fully understood until now. She had learned that compassion, no matter how small or fleeting, had the power to heal, not just the wounds of the body, but the wounds of the soul. The bear's actions were not random. They were a reflection of the deep, universal need for connection. It wasn't just hunger or pain that had driven the bear to Emily's window. It was the instinct to reach out for help, to find solace in another being. And that was something deeply human. Animals, like humans, have their own struggles, their own emotions, their own ways of seeking comfort and care. In this brief moment, Emily had witnessed something profound: the bond between all living creatures, a silent promise that, In times of need, we can find each other. In those dark moments, when it feels as though we are all alone, compassion can be the beacon that guides us. It can be the one thing that allows us to see beyond the surface and recognize the shared vulnerability between us all. As Emily reflected on everything she had experienced with the bear, she realized that this lesson would stay with her forever. Compassion is not just about giving, it's about understanding, about seeing the need in others, whether they walk on 2 legs or 4. It's about being brave enough to step forward, even when it's uncertain, even when it's inconvenient, and offering what little we can. The bear had knocked on her window not just for help, but for connection, for empathy. And in that moment, Emily had answered. In return, the bear had left her with a gift far greater than she could have imagined. The understanding that kindness transcends all boundaries, all fears, and all distance. As we come to the end of this heartfelt story, we're reminded of how simple acts of compassion can create lasting bonds that change lives. Whether it's with a human or an animal. Just like Emily, we all have the power to make a difference. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever experienced a moment where empathy bridged the gap between you and an animal? Or perhaps a time when compassion changed your life in unexpected ways? Share your story in the comments below. We can't wait to read them. If the story moved you, don't forget to hit the like button and share it with someone who could use a little reminder of the power of kindness. And if you want to see more incredible stories like this, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an uplifting moment. Thanks for watching, and remember, no act of kindness is too small. Stay kind, stay compassionate.